I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has the honor of taking the floor on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations. Mr. President, a week ago, on 25th of November of 2024, the Ministers for Foreign Affairs, the member states of our grouping, held an extraordinary ministerial meeting with the purpose of addressing the latest developments in the Middle East and the ongoing Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and most particularly in the Gaza Strip, as well as against the people of Lebanon and the wider region. The foreign ministers reiterated their serious concerns at the continued attempts of Israel, the occupying power, to ignite and explode the Middle East region, as demonstrated, amongst others, by its repeated gross violations of international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law, coupled with its deliberate escalation of violence and continued provocations and violations against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, stability, and the security of the countries in the region. They called on those who may have influence to demand Israel, the occupying power, to exert restraint and desist from its plans to extend the conflict to Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, the Syrian Arab Republic, and the Islamic Republic of Iran, mindful of its potential devastating consequences for the well-being of entire peoples and the peace, stability, and security of the Middle East region as a whole. In this context, we express our condemnation in the strongest possible terms at the large-scale terrorist attacks launched over the past couple of days by terrorist organizations designed by the UN Security Council and their affiliates against the Syrian Arab Republic. We express our unwavering support to the sovereignty, independence, and national unity and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic. A fellow member of our grouping, while rejecting, on the one hand, any attempt, including by external actors, to meddle in Syria's internal affairs, and any plans aimed at instrumentalizing terrorism for political purposes, we support the ongoing efforts of the Syrian government to confront and combat international terrorism with a view to restoring both the state authority and the rule of law throughout its territory.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, we urge the Security Council of the United Nations to shoulder its responsibilities, including on the basis of the relevant provisions of Chapter 7 of the Charter, and to ensure that its resolutions on the question of Palestine are both fully respected and implemented. We stress that the time has come for the UN Security Council not only to adopt a resolution demanding an immediate and permanent ceasefire, respected by all parties, that would allow for unimpeded humanitarian access consistently, safely, and to scale, but also for that body, as well as for all responsible members of the international community, to take urgent measures within the powers conferred upon it by the UN Charter, aimed at ceasing the provision or transfer of arms, munitions, and related equipment to Israel, the occupying power, in all cases where there are reasonable grounds. These deliveries, in all cases where there are reasonable grounds to suspect that they may be used in the occupied Palestinian territory for further prolonging this illegal occupation and further expanding Israel's aggressions across the region, mindful of the relevant provisions of General Assembly Resolution ES 10/24 adopted on 18th of September 2024. We also condemn the veto cast recently by the government of the United States, which amounts to further complicity with Israel's policies and practices in the Palestinian occupied territory, including East Jerusalem, by repeatedly obstructing the Security Council from fulfilling its responsibilities, severely undermining peace, security, and stability in the Middle East. Similarly, we emphasize the urgent need to redouble international efforts to effectively and immediately advance in a much-needed process of accountability for all war crimes committed by Israel, the occupying power, against the peoples of Palestine, Lebanon, and other nationalities, in which all relevant mechanisms of international justice are expected to play a responsible role in order to put an end to the prevailing cycle of impunity. In this context, and given the ongoing proceedings at the international criminal courts, we take note of recent developments and make vows for these to serve as a deterrent and provide for an end to perceptions that in the past may have led Israel, the occupying power, to erroneously think that it is above the law, a situation ultimately and most regrettably that has only emboldened it to continue with its crimes and aggressions against the Palestinian people. Mr. President, we reiterate that establishing a just and comprehensive peace in the Middle East requires Israel's withdrawal from all occupied Arab territories, including the occupied Syrian Arab Golan, and implementing relevant United Nations resolutions, in particular 242, 338, and 497 of the Security Council, which reaffirmed that the acquisition of territory by force is inadmissible in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and the principles of international law, and that the Israeli decision to impose its laws, jurisdiction, and administration in the occupied Syrian Golan is null, void, and has no international legal effect. We condemn the ongoing brutal Israeli aggression against Lebanon and the repeated Israeli attacks against the territory of the Syrian Arab Republic, as they constitute a clear aggression against the territories of sovereign states and a flagrant violation of the provisions of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. We stress the need to hold Israel, the occupying power, accountable and to ensure the cessation of these acts of aggression and illegal activities. We also strongly condemn the deliberate targeting and attacks against the United Nations interim force in Lebanon by Israel, which constitute direct violations of the Charter of the United Nations and the norms of international law, including international humanitarian law. We demand that those responsible be held accountable and that the safety and security of UNIFIL's personnel and premises be guaranteed at all times without qualifications. We express our full support to UNIFIL. We underscore its vital role in supporting regional stability. Mr. President, we therefore call on the responsible members of the international community to take urgent actions and adopt in a decisive measure all necessary measures aimed at preventing the systematic attempts aimed at undermining, including by force and through the resorting to illegal colonial settlers, the viability of the state of Palestine, particularly in light of increasing threats by Israel to annex the occupied West Bank. We recall in this context the conclusions of the ICJ and its advisory opinion of 19 July 2024, which we welcome, and that notes that, and I quote, "The sustained abuse by Israel of its position as an occupying power through annexation and the assertion of permanent control over the occupied Palestinian territory and continued frustration of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination violates fundamental principles of international law and renders Israel's presence in the occupied Palestinian territory unlawful." End of quote. We demand that the government of the United States, as a permanent member of the Security Council, to set aside its political calculations, and for it has been this that has kept that body hostage to a paralysis that, among others, has emboldened Israel to continue with its policies of apartheid and extermination against the Palestinian people. Last, we reaffirm our support for the long overdue admission of the State of Palestine as a full member of the United Nations and to enable it to take its rightful place among the community of nations. And we welcome in this regard General Assembly Resolution ES 10/23 adopted by an overwhelming majority on the 10th of May of this year as a significant step in that direction. We demand that on the basis of the provisions of that General Assembly resolution, the Security Council of the United Nations revisits this pending issue as soon as possible in order to correct once and for all this historic injustice toward the state of Palestine and to favorably reconsider its request for membership in this organization. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.